Hi guys. I'm going to read to you about 16 pages, the preface and the introduction to The Great Pyramid, Secrets and Mysteries Revealed, written by Piazzi Smythe. He was a man, he lived from 1819 until 1900, and he dedicated the latter years of his life to honouring the work of a man by the name of Mr. John Taylor. At the time when Piazzi and John Taylor were living, the Great Pyramid of Egypt was a mystery. There was a lot of speculation, a lot of accepted and indeed sincerely promulgated and accepted knowledge that came from Egypt and the Egyptologists that was accepted as fact. It bothered Mr. John Taylor. He was inspired by his angel to come from a different angle when thinking about the pyramid. So rather than say anything more, I'm going to read to you, for most of you wouldn't have opportunity to even get a hold of this book. It's been in Yahweh's possession for years now. And after I read to you the pages that I want to, you'll understand how important it is to approach the pyramid with the mind of the divine, with the mind of the Creator, with the mind of Yahweh, God within you, realizing that this is indeed the altar to the Lord in the midst of Egypt. And this will give you a really good idea of the controversy that surrounded the pyramid and why men, educated, humble men, who took it upon themselves to find the truth for themselves, rather than basing their work on the works of others up until that point, up until Piazzi Smythe. It had been based on the works and measurements of a lot of other men who'd gone before him. He couldn't handle the discrepancies. And so in honour to support and back up, or disprove, if that's what it boiled down to, the work of John Taylor, he indeed spent months climbing all over the pyramid inside and out with his wife, funded his own trip where he measured with the utmost accuracy the dimensions of the pyramid and recorded it. And indeed, he did prove what was at that time the theory of John Taylor. Okay, reading. This is the preface. When the late John Taylor, publisher to the London University, produced in 1859 his larger work entitled The Great Pyramid, Why Was It Built and Who Built It? And afterwards, in January 1864, his smaller pamphlet, The Battle of the Standards of Linear Measure, the ancient of 4,000 years against the modern of the last 50 years, the less perfect of the two. He opened up for archaeology a purer, nobler, more intellectual pathway to light than that study had ever enjoyed before. But academic archaeology would not accept it. Indeed, the whole reading world stood askance, and I can hardly now explain how it came about that something induced me in February 1864 to commence an independent examination of Mr. Taylor's theory, and my publication in September of that year, that is the first edition of the present book, contained the findings so arrived at. Findings in many points confirmatory of the principal thread of Mr. Taylor's chief and most startling discovery, but exhibiting in the general literature of the subject, and on which, unfortunately, he had been obliged to depend too much, a lamentable deficiency in the accurateness of almost all the numerical data required, and which necessary exactitude nothing but practical examination and instrumental measure at the place could hope properly properly to supply. Meanwhile, John Taylor died, and with almost his last breath emphatically confided this: the most important labour of his long life toil to my most unworthy hands, and yet hands not altogether unused to some of the operations next required. How then, with little help from anyone, save a single subscription volunteered by a kind friend in Edinburgh, my wife and self did, on very scanty private means, sail for Egypt in November 1864, and did through a 4 months' residence on the Great Pyramid Hill in 1865, employ a variety of surveying and astronomical instruments in obtaining many measures of the mighty monument, some of them to far more exactness than had ever been attempted before, and others descending to numerous details unnoticed by former observers, though still leaving other large parts to the future efforts of the nation. All this was described by me, first in abstract to the Royal Society, Edinburgh, in April 1866, and afterwards at much greater length to the world in my 3-volumed book, Life and Work at the Great Pyramid, in 1867. That last publication, even from the very oppositions it called up, helped to spread a knowledge both of the importance of the question at issue and the only means for solving it, especially as against the modern hieroglyphic scholars, the so-called Egyptologists, who, though exceedingly learned in their lettered way touching Egyptian remains of more recent times, have never much troubled themselves to examine the far more ancient, as well as purer, Great Pyramid in the mechanical and scientific manner now required. Indeed, the literary Egyptologists seem, by their criticisms, rather angered than otherwise to hear that such precise and strictly provable data in merely modern instrumental measure, when at last collected by others than themselves, are most successful in showing a radical difference throughout between the great and every other pyramid in Egyptian land. In fact, these measures tend to establish that the Great Pyramid, though in Egypt, is not and never was of Egypt. That is, of belonging to or instructing about pharaonic, idolatrous, and chiefly Theban Egypt. Also, that though built in the earliest ages, far before written history, the Great Pyramid was yet prophetically intended by inspiration afforded to the architect from the one and only living God, excuse me.
Stop there, cut the end up.
Yep.